Okay, well, noswaith dda, a good evening, and it is a very special evening tonight at Ysgol Cwm Brombil. Thank you all for coming. I'm Daniel Williams. I'm one of the directors of the Richard Burton Centre at Swansea University. And, well, let me begin by just thanking some of the people who've helped put tonight together, because I always forget to do that. Particularly Elaine Canning and her team, Matthew Hughes, Command is here as well, all working in the Cultural Institute and have helped to arrange tonight. Sian Williams is here from the Richard Burton Archives, always a huge help with all Burton-related stuff. Sian runs the South Wales Miners Library. And we have Creative and Multimedia Officer Sam John, who stepped in at the last moment to make sure we had a recording of tonight's event. So I'm immensely thankful to Sam as well. The Mayor and Mayoress of Nyth Port Talbot are with us this evening. Diolch I chi am ddod. As are several members of the Burton and Jenkins families across the front of the hall. Rhiannon Trowell has supported this lecture for many years, and I'm delighted to welcome you and your daughters here this evening. Kate has travelled with her daughter Charlotte. Croeso, Charlotte. Croeso cynnes, it's great to have you with us. And our greatest thanks every year, whether she's with us in person or not, is to Sally Burton, Richard's widow, of course, who endowed this lecture and allowed us to be the keepers of the Richard Burton papers at Swansea University. The lecture's been running now for over 10 years. Wel, mae wastad yn rhyddedd arbennig I gael Sally gyda ni. It's always a particular privilege to have Sally with us at the lecture. We managed to keep them going through the COVID years. The great scholar of African American literature, Hazel Carby, zoomed in from Yale 2 years ago, revealing that she was the daughter of a Jamaican airman and a Welsh mother from Pontyclun. Last year it was David Anderson from the National Museums Wales, director of National Museum Wales. He joined us last year to discuss the importance and future of museums after we'd collaborated with them on the Becoming Richard Burton exhibition that had been running that year. We were all profoundly glad that Swansea's Professor Howell Francis had managed to see that exhibition and to characteristically enthuse about it before his untimely passing in February 2021. We wouldn't be here in Margam, nor would the Burton papers be in Swansea without Howell. And it's a pleasure to have Mair with us tonight. Howell, as many of you will know, was Member of Parliament for Aberafan and dedicated himself to keeping the Burton flame and the broader dramatic tradition of which it is a symbol alive in this area. The tradition has been vividly documented by Professor Angela John, who I can't see but is here, right here in the front, a Port Talbot native, of course, and a valued member of the Burton Centre's Advisory Board. And also with us tonight is Eirwen Hopkins, who runs the local Rich History Hanes Rich project with Sally Roberts-Jones here as well. It's nice to see you. So this is the first time that the Avengers have reassembled, if you like. Joined now by Professor Elwen Evans, who's Dean of the Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences at the university, who now chairs the Burton Advisory Board. It's nice to be back in Port Talbot, and even if we're particularly aware of those who are no longer with us. And thank you to Ysgol Cwm Brombil and the head teacher for allowing us to gather here in this way in Burton Country. Diolch yn fawr. Burton Country, the life, times and places of Richard Burton are documented in the archives, of course. And archives are meant to preserve, right? The word itself invokes Noah's Ark, preserving the world's species in a time of global flooding. In the 19th century, English men of letters and educationalists, Matthew Arnold being the main culprit, believed that the Welsh language's place was in an archive of absolutely no use in the modern industrial world, best conserved and studied like ancient Greek or Latin. But as David Iwan's been triumphantly reminding us in the football team's World Cup anthem, Rhaenyra yma o hyd, we're still here. The archive is not a repository of relics. It's alive, and the life of an archive relies on the vitality of the culture that surrounds it, bringing it to life, connecting the past to the present via exhibitions, broadcasts, painting, film, drama, and events like the lecture and conversation that you're here to witness tonight. If an archive needs to do more than preserve, it's also worth noting that archives can't hold everything. That is, there are aspects of human experience that cannot be archived. Self-destruction, says the philosopher Jacques Derrida, leaves no archive. Those aspects of Welsh culture that formed the early Richard Jenkins, as he documents in his diaries, notably nonconformist Christianity, the Welsh language of the Afan Valley, has largely, but not completely, disappeared. How do you archive the experience of, say, language loss or the loss of faith? As Burton himself suggested, playing Martin Dysart in Equus, can you think of anything worse, the psychologist says, than to take away someone's religion? Archives, like history, tend to be written by victors. And that's where the study of literature comes in. I'm a professor of literature, and literature gets at those aspects of experience that in some ways are left out. Loss, melancholia, resentment, but also pleasure, delight, love. That's where literature can take you, both its study and the process of bringing it alive in literature, in film, in drama. And this brings us, of course, to our speaker tonight, because Kate Burton can take us beneath and beyond the archive. She was literally there at key moments in her parents' lives. But in addition to that, as those of you familiar with her work will know, she's an actress who communicates the depth of character, the ambivalence of feelings, the complex mix of motivations that inform our actions, our acts of remembering, repressing, and forgetting. Kate has a long and illustrious acting career, has been nominated for 3 Primetime Emmy Awards and 3 Tony Awards, has appeared in a myriad films and television series as well as stage performances. I won't run through them all now. We might discuss some of them in the conversation that we're about to have. But the list would begin with her acting with her father in a TV series entitled Ellis Island. And this leads on to a slew of hit series, including Grey's Anatomy, Empire Falls, my personal favourite of 2005, and more recently, the hits Inventing Anna and The Dropout. A graduate of history and Russian studies, she has maintained a connection with the academic world too, and will be teaching at Brown University, Rhode Island, next semester. You'll find that Kate is described in various ways online. An American actress, daughter of British actors Richard Burton and Sybil Christopher, says one website. The Swiss-born Welsh-American actress, says another description that I prefer. Tonight we'll hear from Kate in her own words, how she self-identifies and the implications of that for her life and work. So it gives me great pleasure to welcome Kate Burton to deliver this year's Richard Burton Centre lecture, Reflections of a Daughter. Rhowch groeso cynnes I Kate Burton.
Were we writing side by side? I think so. I just said to Daniel that I think that he and I were writing our comments side by side because he's mentioned so many great things that I also want to mention. At the same time last night, in the middle of the night, as we watch ITV3 Mysteries, which is one of my favorite channels when I come to the UK. I have about 15 minutes or ish worth of comments to make, and that's so just, you can time me. And then Daniel and I will have a chat, and then please ask me questions if you would like. I have been struck by the lecturers who have come before me and the topics they have discussed, probing the study of Welsh culture and history and what it is to be from this part of the world. One takes one's roots for granted, but as I have grown and aged, I realize that these roots are deeply embedded, whether you have physically grown up in the land of your forebears or not, as is in my case. I am the daughter of one of the most renowned of Welsh people, a fact that I have always taken in stride and handled with aplomb. What was it like to grow up as the daughter of Richard Burton? I have been asked this question hundreds and thousands of times, and actually this afternoon as well by Wales Online. I was like, really? Are you asking me that question? I can't believe it. My stock answer always has been, I have nothing to compare it to. But the actual answer is less flip and actually more complicated, and ultimately, I hope, more illuminating. Before I expand, I too want to thank some of the people who are here with us this evening. It is the most meaningful to me, above all, that my daughter, Charlotte Ritchie, is here, because she has always taken such a huge and profound interest in her Welsh heritage and the lives of her grandparents. I am so happy to have my cousins Rhiannon Trowell and Sean Owen with me here this evening, and also Catherine and Jane, Rhiannon's daughters. Rhiannon grew up with Dad when he was brought to live with his beloved sister, Rhiannon's mother, my Auntie Sis, after they lost their mother, Edith, my grandmother. Rhiannon's stories about Dada and Mama have always been so brilliantly vivid and humorously vibrant, and I thank you for them. Our great friends Angela John and Meyer Francis are here, also with us. Angela, bravo on being part of the team who shepherded Dada's amazing exhibit through the National Museum of Wales last year, and I know so many people in this room were a part of that. It was a mind-blowing experience for me to tour it, as you can imagine. Meyer, I am unbelievably happy to see you and salute the extraordinary contribution that you and your magnificent husband, our former beloved MP Howell Francis, have made taking care of Dad's legacy in this place where he was born and grew up. I am so glad to be here with Sally Burton, my stepmother, who has looked after Dada's memories with calming grace, humorous aplomb, and great taste. I was initially invited to give this lecture in November of 2020, but I did not want to deliver it on Zoom. 2 years later, here I am. I was in Port Talbot in 2015 to send off our irrepressible uncle, Graham Jenkins, my father's youngest brother. We were all together that day and had an extraordinary time. Charlotte and I returned in 2016 and quite a few times over the last 20 years to spend time here and also at the Royal Welsh College of Music and Drama in Cardiff, of which I am a fellow. Most of you know that I am pure Welsh and that my mother, Sybil Williams, grew up in the Rhondda Valley. So I have spent a great deal of time in the corridors of the Rhondda and Cardiff and of Swansea, Port Talbot, Porthcawl, Carmarthen, Bridgend, and Pontrhydyfen, and this may be the first time I have ever spelled it correctly. I am Welsh to the core, and I have always honored my mighty heritage, even though I was brought up in New York City and consider it my hometown. In fact, I have a t-shirt that says, "Born British, but raised in the streets of New York," and that is me. So, back to the question. What was it like to grow up as the daughter of Richard Burton, the mythic Welsh hero? What was it like to grow up as the daughter of Richard Burton, the man? The answers are different to these two questions. I was born in Geneva, Switzerland in September of 1957, and according to my uncle Emlyn, my godfather Emlyn Williams, he always called me Swelsh. And I think that, yes, Swiss and Welsh and American, so a combo of everything. And I lived in my childhood home in Seligny at Le Pays de Galles, which is Welsh for Wales, for the first few years of my life. I was brought to New York City as a baby for the first time, and I took my first steps on the Queen Mary. There are home movies taken by my dad that document this event. My first memory is around the age of 2 when I was walking on the driveway in Seligny in the summer in my bare feet, and the gravel was very hot under my feet. I remember very vividly the wood smell of the small guest house Camelot at Seligny. I have some vague memories of Seligny and the Café de la Gare and of the Beresford in New York City where we lived during Camelot when Dada was on Broadway, and of Rome where we lived during Cleopatra. To be truthful, Mama was the center of my life, but my adored Uncle Ivor, my father's brother, and his wife, my Auntie Gwen, lived with us too. Dad was there, but in truth, my vivid memories were of the others. Even though there was a lot of international traveling to be with Dad where he worked, our lives were intimate and very close. Mom was put on the planet to be a mother, and Ivor and Gwen were the grandparents I never had. My sister, Jessica, was born 2 years after me, and it did not become clear until she was 2 and I was 4 that she had been born with some major challenges. She started speaking when she was 2, then she stopped speaking, and it was discovered that she was severely autistic, and you don't hear a lot about my sister Jess. She had been parroting me, it turns out. This was just around the time that my parents' marriage began unraveling. It was a fraught time, to be sure, but I was incredibly protected by Mom and Ivor and Gwen. I experienced it somewhat, but was never traumatized by it. We moved from Céligny to London to our house in number 12 Squires Mount. My one indelible memory of Dada at this time was him coming to visit and me waking up and he whistled, and I knew he was there. The next memories for me are moving with Mom and Jess to New York in 1963, where we were going to start our new life. This could have been so difficult, but Sybil Williams was a titan, and everything happened just naturally. Jess and I were surrounded by unconditional love. There were a few years that I saw very little of Dad after this time, but that changed when I was about 7 or 8. One day, Dada picked me up from school and took me around the corner to the Regency Hotel on Park Avenue and introduced me to a lady that I did not know who had a gift for me. This was Elizabeth. And from that moment, I began a reintroduction to Dada's new life, which included this woman who would be by my side for the rest of my childhood and for whom I always had incredibly enormous affection. It also included 4 new children that I would grow up with and who continue to be a huge part of my life. We became a family. And I was told by Liza Todd, my stepsister, many years later, that this family was often disparate throughout the year, but came together in the summer months when I would come to visit. I had no idea about this, by the way. Our closeness was palpable to such an extent that Elizabeth's children asked me to speak on their behalf at her memorial service at Warner Brothers after she died. Everyone found that amazing, but I knew why. Only I understood what it was like to grow up like they did. From the first somewhat awkward visits while Dad and Elizabeth were shooting the exterior locations of Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf at Smith College in Massachusetts, to an LA visit where they were shooting the interiors and sound stages at the studios, I really got to know Elizabeth in the transformation of Martha in Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, so I had a little idea of what she actually looked like for quite a long time. At this time, I stood on my first soundstage in Hollywood, and I had no idea that my life would eventually lead me there. No idea whatsoever. It was a kitchen set, and I vividly remember the food in the fridge was real and not refrigerated, and it smelled terrible. The director was the young Mike Nichols, who was a lifelong friend of both my parents, and I must have felt very comfortable in that environment. He loved my parents equally and was devoted to my mother until the day she died. When Dada died, the first letter I received was from Mike Nichols, delivered to my home in Squires Mount in London, and of course I still have it. The awkward visits of this time were made more awkward by the fact that Dada, I think, I did not know how to deal with having this daughter who was so much like him, but also very much a product of the woman he had grown up with as a young man, with whom he now had absolutely no relationship. What linked them was me. She was an extraordinary mother, and Dad knew that, and he must have also known on some level that fatherhood would be elusive for him, and maybe too ordinary for him. He had not grown up with a culture of parenthood. He had grown up with his eldest sister, Auntie Sis, as his mother, and his older brother, Ivor, provided him the male ballast that he never got from his own father. Had it not been for his teacher, Phil Burton, P.H. Burton, a man who he always referred to as his adopted father, taking him under his wings. Who knows what might have become of him? This story was one that is echoed in two works by my godfather, Emlyn Williams. His autobiography, George, which I spent some time looking at today when we were all meeting. There it was, sitting right there, George. And his play, The Corn is Green, in which Charlotte and I have performed. After Dada married Elizabeth, he brought on this new family, and of course his new family included two stepsons, Michael and Christopher Wilding, a stepdaughter, Liza Todd, and an adopted daughter, Maria Burton, and me. He had a particular affinity for the wildly bright Chris from the get-go, and a wonderfully uncomplicated relationship with Liza, who had lost her own dad, Mike Todd, as a baby. I had a wonderfully uncomplicated relationship with my own stepfather, Jordan Christopher, and I realized many years later how all these step-parents filled in for each other. My mother, too, was brought up by her eldest sister, Elsie, when both her parents died. Perhaps that was something that bonded Mama and Dada. It strikes me now that so many members of my family were parented by others than their actual parents. I was parented as much by my stepmothers and stepfather. Mama and Dada were parented by their eldest sisters and brothers. It was quite extraordinary to have two vibrant families that never intersected and still do not. My mother had married Jordan Christopher, and my sister Amy came along. Jordan had a daughter, my stepsister Jody, with whom I was incredibly close and still am. These patched together families were on both sides of my life, and they worked for me in different ways. Our lives were very private, despite the staggering fame that Dad and Elizabeth engendered at that period. My mother, too, had moved to New York, and as no other mothers of that time did, opened a discotheque called Arthur. Amazing woman. Despite this theatrical glamour, she provided me with incredible stability, which helped me throughout my life. From these awkward early days, Dad and I progressed to creating our relationship. It took time, but we managed to make our way, and I actually think it was this family idea that helped us. I truly bonded with Liza and Chris, and I found myself looking forward to seeing them each summer because in this rarefied place of all-consuming interest in our parents, we really got each other and understood what it was like to be us. Others could not understand. At Elizabeth's memorial, I spoke of snapshots of our childhood. One of these was a summer trip on our yacht, the Charisma, which was named after Kate, Liza, and Maria, around the boot of Italy en route to Dubrovnik for Dada to play Marshal Tito, the great Yugoslavian leader. I was 14 and Chris was 16, and he gave me Steppenwolf by Hermann Hesse to read. We were the readers, and so was Dad, and this connected us all. Through this time, we made our parents into actual parents to the extent that they were capable of it and wanted to do it. I was very clear that Dad, to me, was an extraordinary man and that he was trying mightily to figure out how to do ordinary things for his family and for himself. I had a keen understanding of this from a very early age. The fact that both my parents had remarried and found their significant life partners was quite clear to me. The fact that both these marriages ended gave me a profound understanding of what marriage is and how nothing can be taken for granted, that it is always a work in progress. And when substance and alcohol play a part in these relationships, then that skews the equation even more. As I entered young adulthood, my relationship with Dad entered new and deeper and more comfortable phases, even after I decided to pursue life as an actor. I was the first person in the family to finish university, and he was horrified by the prospect, and we probably had the only fight we ever had about whether to go to drama school in the UK or the US. Meanwhile, he had never gone to drama school, by the way, and I had not been accepted anywhere yet. And I told him that if I did get in anywhere, I would give it up. If I did not get in anywhere, I promised to give it up. And that if I did get in, I would give it up if something significant had not happened to me by the time I was the advanced age of 30. So yes, I chose between the Yale School of Drama and the Central School of Speech and Drama, but Dada was thrilled that I was going to Yale. The lens he saw through was accomplishment, and I was making my own way, and he could see that it was my own path and my own choice. We found the way to be. I saw him in the summers of my college years at Brown, and he came to visit me my senior year wearing a fur coat. I was so embarrassed. For no reason at all, I never asked him to come to Yale. I wonder if it was the fur coat, which in hindsight is really strange. Because during those years, I spent my summers at the Williamstown Theatre Festival, where I did my first professional theatre, and I saw him during the school year, occasionally a little bit in the summer. These were all interesting visits, and I was no longer a little girl, which was intriguing for both of us. Also during these years, he made his way back to the stage. In 1977, I came down from Brown to New York to see him in a preview of Equus. The audience was told right before the show that Anthony Perkins will not be performing at the matinee today, and the role of Dr. Dysart will be played by Richard Burton. The audience erupted at this news. Dada had not stepped foot on a Broadway stage since 1964. I had seen both Anthony Hopkins and Anthony Perkins play the role, so I knew the play well. It was a brilliant production. I knew the first lines came in the dark. With a horse called Nugget, he embraces. Dada said these words, and the hair lifted up on the back of my neck. I realized I had never really seen him on stage. This was what everyone had been telling me about. It was astounding to see this genuine and original theatrical electricity. I understood it and appreciated it as an admirer and as his child. I was 20. The next 6 years I finished college, and after the aforementioned fight, went to Yale and graduated at 24, almost 25. I got a job right out of Yale and started rehearsal with George C. Scott and Noel Coward's Present Laughter. I called Dad to tell him I was in the play, and he asked, "Are you telling me the truth?" As I had never lied to him, this was an amazing question. "Dad's." I said, "No, Dad, I'm lying, and you will come to the theater, and I will not be in the show." I was in the show, and he came to the theater, and he saw me in the show. The circle in the square with Sally. The circle in the square in the round is in the round, so it is very easy to see the audience. I started the show by myself, and I saw him instantly, and he was white as a sheet. This was his first time ever seeing me, I realized. It became my mission to calm him down and to show him that I knew what I was doing. This was the first of a few plays that Dada would see me in. The second was the most significant for me as a budding actress, a one-act by the great Irish writer Brian Friel called Winners, about two Irish teenagers. For me, this was the breakthrough as a young actress. It was my third play out of Yale and truly began my career in the theater. Dad told me so, and he was right. He said something happened to me when I was doing that play, and I'll never forget it. Before Winners, I was assuredly regarded as the daughter of Richard Burton, who was getting special opportunities. After Winners, I began going on my own path. This led me to more plays and then some television opportunities that would enable me to work with Dada were all the more significant, as none of us knew that his life would end in 1984. One of the loveliest times was when Dad was in Private Lives on Broadway and I was in Winners off Broadway, and I would sometimes stay with Dad and Sally at the Lombardy Hotel in Midtown. Those were fun and lighthearted times together, and I particularly enjoyed meeting him in the middle of the night when both of us were going to get a chocolate bar in the fridge. In the summer of 1983, Dada played the White Knight to my Alice in Wonderland on PBS. The scene is indelible and bittersweet and is there forever. A year later, in 1984, Dada and I played a fractious father and daughter in a CBS miniseries called Ellis Island, which was shot at Shepperton Studios, where I had spent so much of my childhood sitting in his trailers, eating fun snacks, and reading the biographies of Russian ballerinas. Besides us, Ellis Island starred a young Liam Neeson, Faye Dunaway, Ben Vereen, Peter Riegert, and a plethora of British actors, including Frances de la Tour and Sherry Lungi. In fact, Liam Neeson told me a fantastic story at Lynn Redgrave's funeral, who's such a deeply huge person in my life. And he said that when he was a very young actor, Dada came out of his trailer, and it was very, very early in the morning. I'm sorry, I'm gonna swear now. And Liam Neeson saw him and went, "Fuck me, that's Richard Burton." That's it. Yeah, I love that story. This was my first time in front of a film camera, and Dada really helped me. I was very tired the day we first shot, and he told me to use my fatigue and not to overcompensate. In the language of Konstantin Stanislavski, less is more. And I have kept to that for my entire life as an actor. He had a wonderful and fun time shooting together. We just had such a, wonderful to see Dada's humor, the way he talked to the crew, the way everybody just was so thrilled to work with him. He was so at home when he was working, despite his occasional disdain for acting. It was occasional. It was a bright and vibrant and joyful experience. He set me on my way, and it happened very naturally. His death later that summer was a profound shock for me and his family, but 38 years later, I find comfort in knowing that he achieved his personal milestones in his too short life. He led a staggeringly huge life that encompassed a complicated childhood, a brilliant and tumultuous adulthood, and I think a more normal and, shall we say, serene, brief old age. It has been 38 years since we lost him. His centenary is 2025. We will be celebrating him then for his staggering accomplishments during his life, as we did last year at the National Museum of Wales. In this last 38 years, I have been able to find and recreate my path as I progress through my life as an actor and a person. From a vibrant life in the theater and with some television, to finding personal success in my early 40s, to shifting to television more wholeheartedly in its most recent golden age, to becoming a professor 6 years ago to today, I have brought the values and the passions that ignited my parents into my own work and life. My passion has always been for language and poetry, and I've become a Shakespearean scholar and director. And that's only happened quite recently. A passion for language and poetry? Where does that come from, I wonder? Could it be that I am pure Welsh? Could it be that when Shonda Rhimes writes for me on Grey's Anatomy and Scandal and Inventing Anna, that she acknowledges this ability to deliver large themes and huge arcs and heightened language, as she does for all her theater actors, of which there are so many? Could it be that I can now teach this? Isn't that what we are all trying to do? To pass it on? Isn't this what the Richard Burton Center at Swansea University is trying to do, to enhance the cultural and historical life of this vibrant and brimming community? I think that's what we're all trying to do. So it has been great to be here with you today. And diolch and fawr. Thank you. Brilliant.
Well, wonderful testament. I think your Liam Neeson impression needs to be cut into a meme and to go viral. There are so many potential threads to pick up. I feel like I'd like to ask you questions that you wouldn't be asked elsewhere. So it's not what does it mean to be. I'm going to pick up on your mention of Sybil, your mother's club called Arthur.
Oh, yes.
And this Arthurian strain is interesting to me.
Oh, yes, I forgot about that. Did make that connection.
In Jackie, right, Natalie Portman plays JFK's wife, and it's revealed that the idea of Camelot as a description for the inner circle of the Kennedy government derived from the musical and their love for playing it. And in the West Wing, made primarily during the George W. Bush era, so a lot of you, I'm sure, will be familiar with the West Wing. There's kind of a nostalgia for the Kennedy period, and it strikes me that Martin Sheen's performance of the president in that is nostalgic for Kennedy, but it's kind of nostalgic for Richard Burton. You know, his presence is Burton-esque on stage, and you yourself appear in it, of course, as the wife of the vice president, is it? Or the wife of the guy who steps in Series 5?
That is, well, no, actually, in that one, I appear as Senator Sarah from Vermont, where I appear as the
okay.
wife of the vice president is Homeland.
Right.
So
yes,
that was
yes.
one of the thrills of my
So
life.
what I was going to say, what is it about you and the American presidency as
I
as,
have really
as
found-
Burton's, because
Yeah.
in Scandal as well,
Yes,
right?
I became president for 10
Yeah.
minutes.
So what
I must say, being in the Oval Office feels great to me. I've always enjoyed it. And no, I've spent a lot of time. But I actually should share with you my one of my great brushes with greatness, which was when I was a little girl. My mother and Mrs. Kennedy set up a special ballet class for Caroline Kennedy and Kate Burton and a variety of children in 1966 in New York City. And so Mrs. Kennedy came to all the classes, and Mom came to quite a lot of them. But one of the great things that happened was the New York blackout happened, which was one of the famous blackouts in New York, and the entirety of Lincoln Center went dark. And Mrs. Kennedy helped me find my underwear with her lighter. So that was one of my brushes with
I
greatness.
wasn't expecting the answer to go in that direction.
There we go. But getting back to the White House, quick segue. Yeah, I think that what it is, I don't know, it is interesting. I've played so many politicians, both comical. I got to play a great comical politician on Veep with Julia Louis-Dreyfus. I played Senator Hallows from Nevada. Yeah, and I feel, having planned as a history and Russian studies major in university to go into diplomacy, which obviously did not happen, I think that I always felt extremely comfortable around those sort of leader types. I mean, I was never with senators, but I was with a lot of UN diplomats growing up. And so I think that that's why I sort of naturally have been cast often in these roles, either as I've played a Supreme Court justice, I've played the vice president, I played the president for 10 minutes, and it feels very comfortable for me. And it's so strange, because really, why should it?
Yeah.
I'm not even American.
Well, I guess my question in a way is it something to do with that? I mean, in the more recent series I've mentioned, The Dropout and Inventing Anna, they both focus on women in the age of Instagram and TikTok and so forth, who create completely new selves for themselves and deceive society. Whereas you represent sort of an older form of femininity, not to be insulting.
But it's true.
That is grounded.
Yeah.
That you represent a kind of authenticity. And I wonder, is there a hyphenated Welsh Americanness about that?
I don't know.
The British American dimension, which subconsciously it evokes some kind of idea of rooted sense of place and consistency and honesty, as against an American culture which stereotypically is seen as not rooted and mobile and deceptive and mask wearing and so forth.
Oh, yes, well, that is. I do believe, though, that my generation of actors, the parts that I've been very, very blessed to play, are women who've made their way, who've worked for what they've achieved. And particularly in Inventing Anna, that storyline was so interesting, because at first she's very repelled by this young whippersnapper, as it turns out, complete con artist. But she's repelled by her, and then she suddenly sees herself in her and starts to make that connection that this is a young entrepreneur, and that she was an entrepreneur back when she was young and created her own business and work. And so I think those stories have naturally always appealed to me. And again, I seem to be cast in those. And it turns out, and also the creator of Inventing Anna was Shonda Rhimes, and she also created Grey's Anatomy and Scandal, in which in all three I've played these extremely forceful women, but the first one, Ellis Gray in Grey's Anatomy, has early onset Alzheimer's. So she's felled by her medical condition very early in her life. And so I've always been, I'm very touched that she's chosen me and that she continues to hire me, and I hope long may that continue. But it's an interesting thing that I've noticed as someone who's grown up and lived in America, that idea of how do you make your way in the world? What is it? It's not enough. You can't just wait for the phone to ring. And that's something that I think we've been discussing a lot in the last probably 10 years with the advent of social media and everything that's come our way. I've gone in 19 different directions, but it feels that these are things that I certainly think a lot about.
Yeah, I guess they explore, in a sense, different forms of gender identities, which is, of course, is, a kind of paramount theme in contemporary culture.
Right.
In terms of your own career, you begin in the 1980s. I suppose there are two shifts that interest me, and I wonder whether they're related. One is the stature of your father. Presumably everyone would know him in the early 80s, to what extent that's the case now.
Right.
And the other is the role of women within TV and film. I would presume that there are more roles, more interesting roles, less sexism, more plurality today, but is that the
I
case?
have really found that. I mean, I will tell you that when I moved to Los Angeles in 2016, I really thought, 2006, sorry. 2006, thank you. Thank you, Charlotte. Hello. Thank God she's here to keep me on the straight and narrow. 2006, I was already in Grey's Anatomy, that I had been commuting from New York to shoot that. And so the best way that I went, quote unquote, to Hollywood is without a single expectation. And I had learned that frankly, from being all my parents' daughters, I mean, Dad had managed to forge his career, starting in the UK, then moving to America, to New York, to Broadway, then to, Hollywood, and then all over the world, because, Hollywood really is the whole world, because, of course, everything's shot everywhere. And I think that when I went there, I had moved from the leading lady, the sort of classic, there's that you start out as an ingenue, the young girl in the play, and then you start to maybe do a little bit of character work as you're making your way towards being a leading lady, then you're a leading lady, and then after that you move into character work. So I had definitely moved away, and I was definitely transitioning, and those transitional periods for any actor are different, and they're transitions, and you just really have to acknowledge, like, okay, things are changing, people see me differently, I'm older, I have different qualities. So there was that aspect of it. And then I remember saying to my managers or my representatives at the time, like, there's nothing going on, I don't understand, I guess that's it. I had thought, well, that's it, I had a great run, it's over now. And then along came an audition for a doctor show called Surgeons. And they said, it's just and this is, I tell this story just because this is the persnicketyness, as they say, if that is a word, of show business, is that just when you think, oh, that's it, I'm done. You'll go in for something, you meet with a young woman who just graduated from USC, African-American, who's only done a little movie, and suddenly, they say, okay, will you read this scene? And it's the mother with early onset Alzheimer's, and you are 46 years old, and you think, oh, dear God, can this be? And you read and think, oh, please, God. And, I'm still doing it 19 years later. So, and that's a classic sort of Hollywood fairy story. But getting back to, Dad's renown, when I was first coming, as I mentioned in my comments, that, Dad being who he was, and me being his child, and me coming into the firmament of Broadway, primarily, that's where I began. It was a challenge, and I had to make my way. And just as I described, it took time to make my way. Little did I know that it was only, he was only going to be with me for a few years. But it was interesting that even after he died, it continued to be the case that I was known as Kate Burton, daughter of Richard Burton. Like, I always knew that would be Kate Burton, daughter of Richard Burton. And I was okay with it, because I knew that had to happen. Again, it was a transition. It was a period of time that happened in terms of people really knowing who Dad was. And then the shocking thing for me came when I forget exactly when this was, but I remember I was doing a movie called Stay, a terrible movie, with Ewan McGregor. Don't ever see this movie. Anyway, it was a very bad movie.
What's
But
it called
anyway,
again?
Stay, directed by Mark Forrester, who's Swiss. We had that connection. Anyway, but actually wonderful to work on. And I remember they were making some kind of life mask of me, because there was the whole sequences where all of us were dead bodies and they were not going to make us actually lie there. So they just made all these, Madame Tussauds versions of us. And the fellow was doing, he worked in Hollywood. He was in his maybe 40s. And he said, how'd you become an actor? And I said, this and that, that's that. And I said, I grew up in an acting family. And he said, oh, really? He said, would I know who your father was? Would I know who your parent was? And I said, you might. I said, his name was Richard Burton. Nothing. And I went, just exactly, shock, a gasp. And I was like, oh my goodness. And that was the first time that happened. And then there were other people in the room who were like, what are you, crazy? Like, you don't know who that is? My God.
Yeah.
And so that was the beginning, and that's been a long time ago now. And what is fascinating for me now is when people say, I don't know who your father is, but I know he was very significant. That's, and then you go, yes, he was, and let me tell you about him. But isn't it interesting? And so that, as much as we educate our young people about who their forebears are, it's important, in the sort of scope of time, it's an important thing. I was particularly thrilled, as we were talking about earlier, when the stamps came out that commemorated the old Vic. And I was really proud that Dad was on one of those stamps. There he was, and I've made multiple copies. I virtually couldn't, hand it out to everybody in the audience of the image. Everybody has one in my family, and that was thrilling to me, because I just thought, oh, that's great. They need to have him there, on the stamp, going around the world, So that really meant a lot to me. And then I think also one of the things that's been thrilling, in answer to your question, is how women in Hollywood are the roles that I've gotten to play in my 50s have been incredibly interesting. And I've played some mothers and some grandmothers, and I'm always happy to play them. But I have gotten to play wonderfully interesting, multi-leveled roles written by wonderful writers, which is what it's all about.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
That's profoundly interesting. Just listening to you, I was just thinking that it's not recently, is it? But not that long ago, Dominic West, McNulty in The Wire, those of you familiar with The Wire, played Richard Burton in a reconstruction of his relationship with Elizabeth Taylor. And Damien Lewis is another similar character who plays Welsh characters occasionally, uses his Welsh identity. Mm-hmm. The difference between those people and Richard Burton and Stanley Baker is that they're both Eton educated, right?
Yeah.
In a sense, in the past, you had working class actors playing kings. Mm-hmm. Now you have kings playing working class characters.
Yeah, right.
So the diversity at the level of, say gender and identity has happened at the same time, maybe, as where the ladders of class have been lifted. There isn't that way out, is that? Is there some truth in that?
I think there is some truth in that. I mean, you and I also had a conversation earlier today about being a native Welsh speaker. And Dada was a native Welsh speaker and my mother was not. And what that signified of the time when they grew up in the 20s, in the Afton Valley and the Rhondda Valley, I've always been very curious about playing working class myself as an actor. Is not something that normally happens to me. I'm always told, yes, you're just too much of an aristocrat. I'm like, really? It's like, that seems a little mad. But it is an interesting thing for an actor. I think that is sort of the ultimate challenge, actually, is to play against what your cultural identity is, how you were brought up. Speaking of Dominic West, who I think is such a fantastic actor, I pretty much have never seen anything where people play my parents. I've just chosen not to watch. So that's my choice. So I can love them all and give them, Helena Bonham Carter. Yeah, no, and I just, it's too, I mean, I laughed one time with Christopher Wilding, Elizabeth's son. I said, oh, there was some truly drecky thing that was going to happen. And I said, oh, I said, we'll be the sad-eyed children sitting on suitcases. And he burst out laughing. He said, that's exactly right. So, it just made me laugh so much. But yeah, I do think the notion of identity particular, like how do you identify yourself, those sort of trappings are falling away.
Yeah.
In a great way. I think it's great.
Yeah. And of course, the narrative I constructed, there are other ways of constructing it, as with the parents of Michael Sheen here. Of course,
yes.
Who's, very rooted in the place he's from and does such great work. Yeah, fascinating. Well, I think time is beating us slightly, I fear, but it's been an absolute delight to listen to you and to talk to you,
Daniel.
Kate. Kate Burton.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.